Alright, so this is going to be a follow-up video to my Pidgeot-EX article that I wrote for PokeBeach. Someone asked would I be willing to show my deck that I'm currently using, and I have no problem doing that. This is more of a work in progress. When I wrote the article, it was about, a month and a half before the set actually even released. So I made proxies, tested what I could against the decks at the time. And now decks adapted for evolution, so some of my information might be off, but I still think the general idea of the deck is still there. And based on card text that I listed, I feel things still work the way they need to. So I'm just going to go in and show my list, explain why I have certain cards in the deck, and then go from there. Now, I'm holding a camera and having to do this with one hand, so things might be a little bit slow, but I'm going to try my best here. For Pokemon, we got standard running 4 Pidgeot-EX. That's gonna just be our basic. Some people like to play 3 EXs and the Mega. I want to play 4. It's my main attacker, so I want to be able to have them when I need them. There are also some games where I just don't ever get a Pidgeot out, and having less than 4, makes those things a little bit more inconsistent. But that's just my preference. If you want to run 3, then go for it. A lot of people building this deck here a very specific way. This one here is more adapted to my playstyle, so that's basically what we're doing there. And of course, we're going to have our 3 Mega Pidgeot-EXs as well, simply because we like the bulk that it offers, and it makes it much better in some matchups. For example, if you're playing against Mega Gardevoir, you don't auto lose if they play something like Rattata that can discard your Fighting Fury Belt. So if a Mega Pidgeot comes into play, they can't knock it out in one hit. That's what you want. Now for my next Pokemon pick, we have 2 Octillery, or Remoraid, and 2 Octillery. This here is basically our draw support. I see a lot of people running Garbodor on the list, and it's not a bad card. I actually do recommend that people who don't want to play Octillery, who want something faster, that they should play with Garbodor. But the problem with the Garbodor build that I found in my testing is that if you take an early lead, which I have done countless times with the Garbodor build, and you get hit by an N and go down to a hand size of like 1 or 2 cards, even 3 is bad, then you're out of the game if you don't hit what you need, simply because you want to be able to find your max potions, you want to be able to find your energy and or mega turbos or other ways that you choose to recover energy. You want to be able to hit those cards, and you can't do that. Now your Shaymins are useless because you have the Garbodor down, and you have to hope that you hit like a Sycamore or something, and Octillery just eliminates that for me. And since the deck is a little slow anyway, I don't necessarily mind waiting a turn to get it down, simply because the deck is optimized to be able to take those slow turns. Once again, it's a preference thing. Some people are trying to play with the Pidgeot, Jolteon, and Garbodor list. I personally think that list has problems for the reasons that I said before, or maybe privately said in the comments section somewhere on the article, but I like Octillery a whole lot more than I like Garbodor. Next Pokemon is 1 Magearna-EX. I feel that if you're playing a deck using colorless Pokemon, you should want to try to utilize some type of support. You can use Manaphy if you want free retreat cost, and that's not something that we necessarily care about because things aren't as fat in this deck. You don't mind letting a Pidgeot stay in the active spot. Mega Pidgeot has retreat cost, and with Shrine of Memories, with Octillery, we can use Remoraid's Wild River attack, which allows you to switch it with one of your bench Pokemon, and it prevents it from getting stuck in the active spot. So we don't necessarily mind having a metal support here, because all Magearna is going to do is allow us to prevent shenanigans that we necessarily don't like facing, like Zora can do confusion. You might come across the odd Mega Venusaur deck that wants to do auto paralysis. Magearna stops all of that. If it's a result of an attack, Magearna stops it. So That's the reason I like this over Manaphy. It simply offers you more utility. We could do something cheeky and run a Jolteon in this list as well, but I don't necessarily think you have a bad matchup against anything that can really use it. This build in particular has a little more defense against Volcanion and a little bit more defense against Giratina, so I don't think we really need it. I'm not opposed to the idea of testing a Jolteon-EX in the list. It's a really good card and it can turn those matchups into something better. But I feel if you want to use a blocking attack like that, then you kind of want to use Regice simply because it'll block Megas as well as basic EXs, and that's kind of, in my opinion, much better. The reason I say that is because I look at the pros and cons of things. Jolteon will hit things like Yveltal, Lugia, and I guess other Pidgeot decks if you happen to run into them for a lot of damage, 140 without Fighting Fury Belt. And that's really good against those decks. But Jolteon only hits basics. So if you were to come across a Mega Scizor, it does nothing. Come across a Mega Mewtwo, it does nothing. Comes across a Mega Gardevoir, it does nothing. If you come across Zizernia's version of Giratina, well then both of them don't do anything. And you'd much rather have ran a Glaceon-EX. But I just feel in overall utility, Regice does more for the deck because it blocks Mega Mewtwo and it blocks Giratina. They just can't hurt it. And now your opponent has to have something to deal with that. So if people want to use Jolteon, that's fine. I simply think Regice is the better option given this deck. We want cards that can do more for us while not having to run something else. So going into the trainers, got to get this right. We have 2 Professor Birches. On my list, I actually recommend 3, but due to having space, I decided to remove 1 for another card, and it has been useful. There are times where I've had droughts and couldn't really hit anything, but I feel most decks only run 2 N and 3 Sycamores anyway, or not most, but a lot of decks choose to run that as their engine, and we still technically have our 3 Professor cards in the deck, so it's not like we're really losing much. Though I should say that we are a bit slower, so we want to be able to hit our draw cards when we need them. But I feel most of the time when we need to see a specific card, we're better off just searching for it anyways. But our next card we're going to be putting in is 2N, simply because it is a really good draw card early on in the game, and it can punish your opponent if they got too many mulligans or they decide to take an early prize lead. You will find yourself relying on N a lot throughout the game if you manage to get set up slowly, but it's not too much of a big deal. Even if you manage to take an early game lead and your opponent took some prizes, you can still end yourself down to like a hand size of 2, which doesn't matter because you have the artillery and go back up, and your opponent is stuck in top deck mode, and that's just a really good card. Skyla was a card I had listed in the text for the actual match simply because how you want to build this deck is completely up to you. I feel that a lot of the time when people are drawing your deck like crazy, they're trying to hit 1 specific card, maybe 2, but Skyla offers a way to complete the puzzles that you really need. I'm not talking about Puzzle of Time, I'm just talking about puzzles in general. Maybe you have 1 of 3 in a combination or 2 in combination of a card that you need. Like, for the most part, if you're trying to get your mirror move off, you want to be able to do something like Max Potion, Energy, or Shrine of Memories. And in this deck here, you have a way to get all of those cards that you need, but sometimes you might be 1 or 2 cards short, and Skyla is a way to do that. Sometimes you don't want to necessarily risk having to draw into the cards, and you just might find yourself better off just taking 1 piece of the puzzle as opposed to trying to hard draw into, all 3 or even 2. Sometimes I find myself just having to sacrifice a Pidgeot simply because the risk is just way too high in order to get the things we need. Sometimes the risk pays off. You might play a Birch, flip heads, and draw everything you need. Sometimes you just need the Max Potion, or sometimes you just might not have anything to work with. and you just find it's better to just attack them and then give your opponent 2 prizes and go from there. I'm trying to find a way to remedy that so it's not too big a deal, but I haven't really found a way to properly do that, because a lot of the times it's just up to the luck of the draw. Sometimes you hit cards you need, and sometimes you have them, sometimes you don't, and you just kind of got to play the game the best way you can. Again, I like Skyla a whole lot more over Trainer's Mail, simply because there are times where you play a Trainer's Mail and can't do anything with it, or sometimes you'll hit a bunch of cards that you can't really use, and they become more of a crutch later on. Sometimes you just don't even take it and you just play the card for no effect. Skyla is better. As you see, we played 2 copies of it. I used to have it at 1, but I found myself having issues drawing into Skyla when I needed it, which was the same problem that I was having with Hex Maniac. But I upped it to 2, and that was simply a much better decision, simply because now I see them more often and I can get the cards that I'm looking for. I guess we'll put it here. Next card we have in the list, 2 Lysanders. No need for introduction here. You guys already know what he does. So we're just going to go ahead and move into the next card. We have 2 Hex Maniac. Now I opt to run 2 Hex Maniac simply because when I was running 1, and this was a problem I was also having with Skyla, I was not seeing it when I needed it, and I was losing games that I could have won had I had it. I play in weekly tournaments in my area, and I came across a Darkrai Giratina deck that I wasn't able to beat because I couldn't hit my Hex Maniac when I needed it. Then that was the first game I recognized that I should probably have more Hex Maniacs in my deck. Going back to League, I played against a Carbink Zygarde-EX deck. Same thing there. I wasn't able to hit my Hex Maniacs when I needed them, and I just ended up having myself being stuck for a lot of turns simply because I couldn't get past Safeguard. The same issue I was having with Giratina-EX. Then I played against a Machamp Break deck, and the same thing happened there, except I never had access to my Hex Maniac because it was in my prize cards. So too many games I lost was because my 1-of text I never saw. So I went up to 2 Hex Maniacs and it instantly solved the problem. I'm also thinking about running a 3rd Hex Maniac simply because it's super good in this deck. I don't necessarily want to play Garbodor, and it gives me the flexibility to still run Octillery, but allows me to stream them when I need them and other stuff like that. And because of that, it even allows me to have better games against Greninja and Volcanion. Now, the matchups are still not favorable, but we can still do something because we have more Hex Maniacs in our deck. At a recent tournament last week, where I was playing one of my friends in a practice tournament for regionals, I managed to Hex Maniac him 5 turns in a row, and that really ruined his Yanmega deck because he wasn't able to use the ability to hit me. So having more Hex Maniac is good, and I would even recommend running 3 if you can find a space. 2 is a nice number, but 3 is just, it's good. Next card, we have our 1 Sycamore. Now this series really controversy some people have with the deck lies. Most decks you run 3 to 4 Sycamore. Like, the decks aren't ever playing 2. They hardly are ever playing anything less than like 3 or 4 for the most part. But I don't necessarily want to discard my resources. As you see, every card in the deck kind of has a purpose, and we don't want to lose them if we don't have to. So I figure 1 Sycamore is still better than not having any at all. Sometimes we get a hand that we can't really use at the time and we can discard it. Like, we don't necessarily mind losing a Skyla, a Lysander, or a Hex Maniac. Maybe we have a Giratina, don't really need it in the deck, and we can just discard these things. So my 1 is still good. Sometimes it still shows up when it's not really wanted, and I have to force myself to discard a bunch of things. But this is the reason why I only play 1, is so I minimize greatly the chances that I will discard anything that I need. But it's still there if I need it. Sycamore is still a really good card in such a fast format, and I'd rather have 1 copy in a deck than none at all. Next card that I opted to put in is a Pokemon Fan Club. Now, some people might ask, well, why are you running this? And this is mostly because in my hand, I tend to have a lot of Ultra Balls in my hand. And I have to end up discarding a lot of things just to maybe get a Pidgeot down or a Remoraid. So what I did was I took out one of my Ultra Balls and replaced it with a Pokemon Fan Club. Because on our first turn, we don't have to draw cards. If we get a Pidgeot or something down, then we're good. We just play a Pokemon Fan Club that would have been an Ultra Ball, and we could put down 2 Remoraids or more Pidgeots or whatever. We have it when we need it. So that pretty much improved my opening. If I see this card during my first hand or maybe sometime early on in the game, then it's super good because I can get a bunch of Pokemon down and not have to really worry about much, which is kind of what I want to do. And it also saves me resources because I don't have to discard a bunch of cards that I don't want to discard just so I can play an Ultra Ball. Sometimes I'll have to discard like a Max Potion and whatnot, but it's horribly like matchup dependent what you want to discard with Ultra Ball. Like, you really have to understand the mechanics of your deck and figuring out the mechanics of your opponent's deck and knowing what to do at that particular time. So I just play one copy of that over 4 Ultra Balls, and it's been working greatly for me. Another card that is a must in Pidgeot-EX is Max Potion. I see a lot of Pidgeot decks out there that do not run Max Potion, and it baffles me when people say Pidgeot-EX is a bad card because they can't do anything with it, when they're not even playing the deck right. And I will challenge anyone on that. If you're a Pidgeot-EX deck, I don't care what version of the deck you're building. You can run straight Turbo Mega Pidgeot, Garbodor, Jolteon, but you can run whatever version of the deck you want. But if your deck does not have Max Potion in it, it's a bad Pidgeot deck. And the reason I say this is because people like to say that it is a bad card because they're building the deck wrong. This will be the equivalent of saying that Mega Scizor EX is a bad deck because you're not running like energy, like denial in it. Like, that's the reason you play the deck. So you run it with energy denial is because it has synergy with the deck. And it has tournament results, so I can't really say much about it. A Pidgeot deck did top. It got 9th out of regionals. Was the Pidgeot, Garbodor, Jolteon build. But that deck played Max Potion. So a lot of it comes from people not really understanding how the deck is supposed to work. A lot of people typically just they want to run it like Mega Rayquaza, and they don't have necessarily like results that they want with it. And I think that's the wrong way to run it. I'm not saying my build is the correct way, but I think this build is more on track. If you play to Pidgeot's strength instead of trying to make it like Mega Audino 2.0 or some Mega Rayquaza build, then you'll have much better results with the deck. So 4 Max Potions is a must in this deck. Now, I said you can probably get cheeky with your card counts if you're playing Puzzle of Time, but I absolutely believe you need to have 4 Max Potions in the deck. You don't want to not be able to draw them when you need them. So going into our next card, and this here is one that I recently added to the deck, is 4 Puzzle of Times. And I simply like the consistency it has with this deck. Now, there are a bunch of bad times with the card. Sometimes you just have copies in your hand and can't do anything with them. And that can kind of suck because they bog you down. You want to be able to use one card to do something. But I like Puzzle of Time enough with this deck, since it's slow, to be able to recover your resources. You can get back 2 Max Potions, or you can get back hammers, or just anything else that you want to do with the list. It's super good, and I recommend any version of Pidgeot, if they can fit it, that they should at least try it. Now, due to space, I had to take out my Super Rod and my Special Charge, which are cards I would love to have in this deck in addition to Puzzle of Time. So that way, when I play a Puzzle of Time, it can free up the chance that I might need to take back a double colorless energy. And that's the only reason I don't like about it, is that without those cards, I have to save them for a time where I need a double colorless energy or another supporter or something, because I had to take out those cards that were meant for that. Still, it's a really good card, and if I could find the space, I would put some of these things back in. Next card, we have 3 Ultra Balls, and as I said with Pokemon Fan Club, the Pokemon Fan Club is technically to simulate the 4th Ultra Ball. If I draw the Pokemon Fan Club in my starting hand, then I can take basics that I need. On top of that, it saves the Ultra Balls to be able to get me things like Octillery, which would be nice to get into play. Next card, we have our 3 Versus Seekers. Now, I took out a Versus Seeker for Puzzle of Time, and I kind of agree with the idea of that, but there were times where I needed the 4th Versus Seeker. So if I were to put any other card back into the deck, it would definitely be a 4th Versus Seeker. That way, my Puzzle of Times give me more access to more resources that I need. But you guys already know what Versus Seeker do or does, so I don't need to spend time explaining it. Next card we're going into is Mega Turbo. Now this here is a card that I really like with this deck. It has synergy with Mega Pidgeot. It makes it to where if you don't have an energy, then you can just put one down, and then if you have a manual attachment for a turn, you can put it on another Pokemon, or you can use it and get a Mock Cyclone on something. These are all extremely good possibilities and things that I've worked with the deck. If you don't want to run 2 Mega Turbo, you can take one out and run with like an energy retrieval or an energy reset. Both cards are possibilities, as they do either get you back energy or save energy. And these are also things that I am looking into testing as well. Like I said, this deck is still, I guess it's still young, simply because Mirror Move exists in a format where everything can knock you out in one hit. So it becomes a little bit harder to play than it once was, you know, years ago in the game. But I feel things are on the right track right now, and this is kind of what we want. So I guess that's it for Mega Turbo, man. There's really nothing else to really explain there. It just gets energy back when you max potion, and that's what you want. Next card that I opted for were 2 Enhanced Hammers. Now this instantly improved matchups. It instantly improved matchups with Rayquaza, with any Zoroark build, any build that uses special energy. And this is what I believe throws the matchup over the top with that was the name of that match, the Darkrai Giratina-EX match. Simply because you could discard their special, their double dragon energies, which technically gives Darkrai 80 additional damage to his, is it 80? No, 40 additional damage to his attacks, which helps a lot. And it also keeps them from knocking your Pidgeots out in one hit. It also helps a lot in Mega Mewtwo, since every DCE, you know, on a Pokemon gives it 60 more damage. This kind of mitigates that just a little bit. And with Puzzle of Time, we can get these things back when we need them, which is the reason why I kind of want to have, you know, my 4th Versus Seeker back in the deck, simply because Puzzle of Time allows me more times to use Enhanced Hammer, which is kind of what we want to do. So it's good at turning certain matchups that will be questionable at best into something a little bit more favorable, so you see the card. Next card we're going into is Floatstone. You guys already know what this does. Octillery is fat, and I mean, Magearna is not a Pokemon you really want to spend an energy on if it's in play. And Floatstone gives these Pokemon free retreat costs. Since there's no reliable way to remove Pokemon tools in the format, this card is extremely powerful. When it comes down, it stays down, and you simply just, well, I mean, you have a Pokemon with free retreat. Which is another reason why we opted to not go with a mana fee, simply because retreating isn't really an option with this deck. Pidgeot's not fat, and it's not a Pokemon you mod in the active spot. The Mega has a free retreat cost. Remoraid is the only fat Pokemon in the deck, which justifies the Floatstones. And Manaphy, another Pokemon that you don't want to have to spend an energy on to retreat, isn't painful to retreat should you need to retreat it with an energy. So, Floatstone, another one of them cards that doesn't need an introduction, but goes from there. Next card, we still have our 2 Assault Vests in the deck. I feel this card is just way too good in a format where special energy run rampant. I know some people might say it loses its synergy because of Enhanced Hammer, but there are some times where you don't mind letting energy stay on the board so that way you can do certain things. Like if you're playing against a fighting deck, for example, and your opponent has a strong energy, instead of discarding it, you leave it on and they do 20 more damage, but you reduce their damage by 40 because of the Assault Vest and the resistance that Pidgeot has. So sometimes it's beneficial. Other times you don't mind discarding it because the damage that your opponent is doing to you isn't really lethal and you can manage it. So Enhanced Hammer is really there for those matches where you kind of really need to discard something. If you don't really need that many, we can still take out one. I'm still like the idea of having at least one Enhanced Hammer in the deck and would definitely give me space to run things like Crushing Hammer. But the way things are now, everything is doable. Our next card is we have our 2 Pidgeot Spirit Links. Now, some people say, why aren't you running like 3 or 4 of them? And that's simply because we do have a lot of turns to Mega Evolve Pidgeot. We just don't mind, draw passing or drawing and evolving into Mega Pidgeot. So there are times where we get 1 or 2 of them into play for free and don't even need the Spirit Links. And it gives us things for options like Assault Vest on our Pidgeot should they evolve for free. It's a card that I like, and it's a card that I recommend that Pidgeot decks build, especially if you want to go for the slower build. If you're running Turbo Mega Pidgeot, then obviously you don't want the Assault Vest, and you just run more Pidgeot Spirit Links. But for this build here, I'm having a lot of success with this. Next card here is we have our 3 Shrine of Memories. Since we're running Mega Pidgeot, we need to have this card. Now, I also see a lot of Mega Pidgeot decks not running this card. And I also feel if you are running Mega Pidgeot, you should be trying to include Shrine of Memories into your list along with Max Potion. Still the same people who say Mega Pidgeot. Alright, so my camera died, so I had to go back, remove the video footage from this phone to be able to record more. But going back to my previous thought, some people say Mega Pidgeot simply isn't good because, well, they don't know how to really do anything with the deck. So when I see those lists that don't have, the Shrine of Memories and the Max Potion in it, assuming you're running your build with Mega Pidgeot, then your argument holds less weight. The reason this here is a problem is because a lot of these people tend to have a ton of subscribers on YouTube. And when they say, something sucks, when they don't understand it or even have the deck built halfway decently to even write at all, then it turns those people off from the list. So I'm just saying, as the player of this deck, I've put like 50 something hours into testing this particular build, and I'm learning it and we're making changes as we go. But for our next card, we have our Silent Lab. Now, this was a Parallel City, and the reason I took this out is simply because decks that use Skyfield kind of adapted and have more tools to work with, and I find Parallel City less effective than I find Silent Lab. The reason for that is because I found myself using Parallel City as a way to stop things like Shaman, Hoopa, and Dragonite. Where in reality, if they had a free bench space, they would just play a Shaman, draw a bunch of cards, bump my Parallel City, and then get a bunch of Pokemon back down into play, which immediately, hurt the matchup. And I found with Silent Lab, if they don't necessarily have a Skyfield and they can't bump it, then now they can't play their Shamans, they can't play their Dragonites, and they can't play their Hoopas. That's extremely powerful. This is a card I would like to have 2 of in the deck. And as you see, we took out our Paint Roller and a Stadium so we can make room for some of these other cards. And one of those cards had to be removed so I can fit other things in. I would love to at least have my Paint Roller back in the deck, or at least a 5th Stadium. And that 5th Stadium, I would probably either run a 2nd Silent Lab or run a Parallel City. But I was trying to play Parallel City as if it was Silent Lab, and you simply can't do that. So I decided to cut the middleman out and run the Silent Lab instead. Now, we also play 2 Hex Maniac as well. So We might not need to run a heavy Silent Lab count. If we need, we can run a 4th Shrine of Memories, which is also an option. But since we play 4 Puzzle of Times, we can still recover these cards if we happen to need them. The other reason why Silent Lab is good in the deck is because it turns off Giratina, especially if you can get it down before the Chaos Will. It turns off Safeguard. It stops things like Wobbuffet, well, if you haven't been playing it expanded. And it turns off things like Mr. Mime, so that way, if you want to use Almost Night Spirit, you can put 20 damage on the bench Pokemon and go from there. Unfortunately, it turns off Magearna, but I found out in the matchups where I need to have Silent Lab, Magearna doesn't really do much good anyway. So that's always a good option. It also beats Volcanion. I run into a lot of Volcanion decks that don't run supporters. And if you get that down, a Silent Lab down, and they can't remove it, then you turn off their entire strategy, which is extremely good. So that's my reason for running the Silent Lab over the Parallel City. I think it offers more synergy with the deck, and while Parallel City is good, there are other things that can do things better for the deck, which is the reason why we like Silent Lab. Next, we have our energy. 4 double colorless energy and our 4 basic metal energy. Now, the deck list I recommend has 10, but I found 10 in my testing to be too much because a lot of times we're just holding on to cards, and a lot of those cards are energy, and we either end up discarding them for Ultra Ball or they just sit around doing nothing. So we removed 1 and added in another card, probably like a second Scholar or something, and we had 9. I like 9. 9 is a very comfortable number. It feels very consistent, and it's a number I would like to go back up to, but in order to find more space, I went down to 8 energy, and that has been proving to be a good number as well. Sometimes we do get an energy drought, but we only need 1 energy to use the attack we want to use. And the good thing about double colorless energy is that in most cases we only ever need 2 energy cards attached to a Pokemon anyway in order to use our bigger attacks. So it feels like it supplements that energy count just a little bit, and we can really stretch these 8 energy here when we need to, since we don't need to have an energy every turn. Wait for our opponent to hit us. If they choose to not do anything, then we attach a double and we put them on the clock. So overall, this here is the build that I've been having a lot of success with. I know you guys wanted to see my list and how it's running. There are some things I would like to change, but I'm finding it very hard to find the space for the cards. Right now, I would like to fit in 4 Crushing Hammers, and if I can fit 4 hammers into this deck, we could have something extremely trolly on our hands. Now, this isn't going to be anything like the Sableye deck that's been expanded, or even like Mega Scizor-EX, but I do feel hammers aid Pidgeot in maintaining its strategy a little bit more. Maybe you can keep an opponent from attacking you, which means you can be attacking them. And while I have been playing this deck, and while it appears to be slow, the deck is also fairly quick. Like if you're playing off your opponent's momentum, then you should be able to match card counts with them. The only time the deck actually felt slow is when my opponent wasn't able to do anything, and I was sitting down waiting for them to do something. Now, this deck still does have matchup problems. Like, for example, Mega Mewtwo, while the matchup isn't exactly unfavorable, it's not exactly favorable either. It's more or less like a 50-50 to a slightly even type match, simply because Mewtwo has the ability to explode, and you really can't do anything about it. Now, the thing that has been quite interesting to me is Lugia-EX and Yveltal-EX aren't necessarily cards that are extremely bad for this deck, simply because they don't gain a lot of damage quickly to really do anything to you. Now, if they start dumping a bunch of energy on those Pokemon, then you have to worry about them. But I found them to be less of a problem than Mewtwo is, simply because we could still put a bunch of energy on a Pidgeot or Mega Pidgeot and force them to hit us. or we hit them first and force them to hit us back, and they still won't be able to do enough to like knock us out in one hit, which doesn't matter because then we max potion the damage and we attach the energy and hit them back. Like those type of matches are good for us. So far with this build, I haven't really lost to any dark deck out there. Now there was that time where I didn't have access to my Hex Maniacs, couldn't do anything to Giratina, but I feel the changes we made to the deck address that, and based on my testing, they have been extremely positive for those particular matchups. So as of now, this is the list that I'm working with, and I am looking for changes. So I want to know your feedback on it, and maybe I can explain in greater detail why I chose certain cards over others. But that's the video. I hope you all enjoyed it, and I hope you all consider making Pidgeot at least a deck choice, or maybe something that you build for fun, because it is an incredibly fun deck and I have been having fun playing with it.